The Obra Dinn was a British trade ship owned by the East India Company, which set sail in 1802 to make a voyage from England to Asia via the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. The crew, led by Captain Robert Witterell, consisted of 51 crewmen and also took 9 passengers, including Bun Lan Lim and Itbeng Sia, 2 members of Formosan royalty, and their guards. However, the ship failed to reach its destination of the Cape of Good Hope and was thus declared lost at sea. In 1807, the Obra Dinn returned ashore to Falmouth, England, with no living people on board. The East India Company dispatched its chief inspector to determine what happened to everyone on board the ship. When they arrived, they received a mysterious package containing a book and a watch-like device known as the Memento Mortem. In this video, we will chronicle everyone's fates from start to finish, showing exactly what happened to everyone and why the ship suddenly reappeared after all those years. As you may have guessed, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't completed Return of the Obra Dinn, I recommend you do that now. If you have, then let's begin our story. Tragedy first struck the Obra Dinn almost immediately after it departed from England. The ship docked in port to pick up cargo, and as the crew was lowering it down into the hold, seaman Lars Linder lost his grip on the pulley ropes, causing the platform holding the cargo to fall. Linder tried to warn the others on the cargo deck, but it ended up being for nothing. The cargo fell and came crashing down onto seaman Samuel Peters, crushing and killing him instantly. Unbeknownst to the crew, the falling cargo also resulted in the death of an unidentified stowaway who died when the barrel they were hiding in fell off the platform and hit the ground. The barrel was then put away with the rest of the cargo, leaving the stowaway undiscovered for the duration of the journey. Linder was not punished for his actions, as the incident was deemed to be an unfortunate accident. However, the misfortunes of the Obra Dinn had only just begun. One night, as the ship was sailing near the coast of Portugal, the Obra Dinn was hit by a patch of cold weather. While the Russian crew members were playing cards, seaman Solomon Syed suddenly woke up in a coughing fit. His fellow countrymen, Abraham Akbar and William Wasim, tried to make him better, but Syed wouldn't stop coughing and eventually died from his illness. Syed was taken to the ship's surgeon, Henry Evans, who discovered that he died from a lung disease. He was then wrapped up and his last rites were given before his body was then thrown overboard. However, Renfred Rajub, a friend of Akbar and Wasim, also started feeling unwell around the same time. He was taken to Evans, who determined that he had been infected with the same disease that took Syed. Evans divulged his findings to the third mate, Martin Perrott, and assured him that whatever disease Rajub was infected with wasn't contagious. He gave Rajub some medicine and plans to monitor him, but Rajub too passed away shortly after. While the butcher, Emil O'Farrell, was teaching the midshipmen how to butcher a cow, Evans told Akbar and Wasim to take Rajub's body to the carpenter's shop to have it wrapped and his last rites given, just as they did for Syed. They carried him to the carpenter's, the two of them tearfully mourning the loss of their friends. When the Formosans boarded the Obra Dinn, they also brought with them a large chest, which they went to great pains to keep guarded at all times. However, they were unaware that the chest would eventually lead to the downfall of everyone left on board the ship. One night, the second mate, Edward Nichols, went to examine the Formosans' chest, as he was curious to see what they were so desperate to protect. He went down to the cargo deck where the chest was being held and knocked out Hokseng Lao, the guard who was protecting the chest at the time, by clubbing him over the head. Nichols then opened the chest and discovered a mysterious glowing shell inside one of the compartments. However, as he was about to take it, he heard a voice. He left the room where the chest was stored and came face to face with Nunzio Pasquale, a passenger on board the Obra Dinn. Pasquale had overheard noises on the cargo deck and went down to see what was happening. Nichols didn't want Pasquale to find out what he was up to, so he made an excuse to speak to Pasquale and stabbed him in the chest before he could react. After killing Pasquale, Nichols managed to escape his crime by pinning the murder on Lau. Captain Witterell put Lau on trial, and he was subsequently found guilty of Pasquale's murder. Miss Lim tried to convince them that Lau was innocent, but Sia told her that there was nothing they could do to save him. As such, Captain Witterell sentenced Lau to death by firing squad. He was suspended from the ship's sail, and the gunner, Christian Wolfe, led the firing squad to execute him. Most of the crew watched the execution take place, and one of the passengers, an artist named Edward Spratt, drew the scene, which he later named Justice at Sea. Later that night, Nichols made plans to escape the Obra Dinn with the chest. He recruited a number of the crew to help in his scheme to leave the ship, and went so far as to kidnap the Formosan royals in the hope they could lead them to even more treasure. In total, Nichols managed to recruit his steward Samuel Galligan, top man Lee Hong, and 3 seamen, Alarkus Nikishin, Alexei Torporov, and Patrick O'Hagan. They made preparations to escape during the night, kidnapped Bun Lan Lim and Itbeng Sia, and loaded the Formosan chest onto one of the lifeboats. However, they did not go away quietly. Many of the crew noticed them trying to leave, and a fight ensued between the crew and Nichols' traitors. In the end, Nichols' crew emerged victorious. Lars Linder and midshipman Peter Milroy were left beaten, while helmsman Finlay Dalton was injured by a spear to the leg. In a last-ditch attempt to stop them, top man Timothy Butermont climbed up from the side of the ship to rescue Miss Lim, but he got shot by Nichols before he could even get close. Butermont's leg got caught in the ropes around the rigging, and his body was left dangling from the ship for the duration of the journey. Afterwards, the mutineers escaped out onto the water in the dead of night, unaware of the horrors that would soon be upon them. Nichols and his mutineers rowed out into the night with the intent of reaching the Canary Islands in the next 3 days. Itbeng Sia was concerned for Miss Lim's safety, but she assured him that she was okay despite the situation. They began talking about stopping the chest falling in the water and being attacked by monsters, and Lee Hong, who could understand them, tried to relay what they said to the rest of the mutineers. As soon as he did, however, a mermaid-like creature appeared from the water and threw a spear at them, piercing Hong's chest. After the sudden attack, Nichols ordered his traitors to keep rowing and get as far away from the mermaid as possible. But 2 more mermaids appeared from the water and joined the attack, each with a glowing shell in their hair. One threw a spear at Patrick O'Hagan, skewering him through the neck, while another grabbed Alarkus Nikishin and dragged him overboard. Amidst the chaos, Miss Lim called for Sia to use the chest and, using the spear that killed Hong to cut his bonds loose, he began making his way to it at the other end of his boat. While the fight continued, Nichols chose to do nothing but cower in his boat, even as Alexei Torporov was pulled overboard and a mermaid began clawing Miss Lim's throat. Samuel Galligan pleaded for his boss to shoot the mermaids, and was so preoccupied with the attack that he didn't notice Sia pick up a knife that Nikishin dropped and stab him in the back of the neck with it. Having finally reached the chest, Itbeng Sia opened the drawer containing the shell, then took it and placed it in the pool of mysterious liquid in the top of the chest. As soon as he did, 3 beams of light erupted from the chest, and each one hit a mermaid, leaving them stunned. But Sia was too late. Miss Lim had already had her throat torn apart by the mermaid, and to make matters worse, Sia's arm was badly burned by the liquid in the top of the chest. As he lay dying, Sia called out to Miss Lim in the hope that she was okay, before he too eventually passed on. In the end, the only survivor of the attack was Nichols. With the mermaid stunned, and all of his conspirators dead, he adapted his plan. He threw all of the bodies of his partners into the water, tied up the unconscious mermaids, brought them into the boats, and then headed back with his tail between his legs. The ship's 4th mate, John Davis, spotted Nichols' return with the 2 lifeboats. He ordered the crew to get the captain and inform him of Nichols' return, who claimed that he had brought treasure with him in an attempt to placate them for his betrayal. However, Nichols was also spotted by Chio Tan, the remaining Formosan guard. Confronted with the man responsible for the deaths of his friend and masters, Tan didn't hesitate to exact his revenge and shot Nichols before he could board the ship. The traitor was dead, but the troubles for the crew of the Obra Dinn were far from over. The morning after the attack, the crew brought the mermaids aboard, suspending them above the deck in a net. They also brought the bodies of Bun Lan Lim, It Beng Sia and Edward Nichols aboard, leaving them on the deck. While Henry Evans and his mate, James Wallace, tended to the bodies, the sailors worked to retrieve the Formosan chest. At the same time, Captain Witterell began interrogating Chio Tan. He asked him to tell him everything he knew, about the chest, about the mermaids, and about his deceased masters. Top man Huang Li translated the captain's questions, but Tan responded that everything was the captain's fault and that the shell must be protected. The captain asked him what he meant by a shell, but before Tan could say any more, 3 quill-like spikes shot out from the net holding the mermaids. The first one barely missed the captain's foot. The bosun, Alfred Castile, narrowly avoided the second, but the third went straight through Chio Tan's chest. The power of the shot was so strong that the spike passed through Tan and also pierced Seaman Hamadou Diome, who was restraining Tan on the captain's orders. Captain Witterell decided that the best course of action was to take the mermaids and the chest below deck and lock them away. He ordered the bodies of the deceased to be thrown overboard, and then discussed with the other senior officers what to do next. As such, the crew carried the mermaids in the net down to the cargo deck to imprison them in the ship's lazarette. On their way down to the orlop deck, Thomas Sefton, the cook, noticed the mermaids and, after making a joke about cooking them, saw the shell in the mermaid's hair. The sailors tried to warn him to stay away, but he got too close, and the mermaid, sensing what he was trying to do, smacked him across the face with its tail, a blow so powerful that Sefton died instantly. As a direct result of Sefton's mistake, the mermaid's movements in the net caused Abraham Akbar and William Wassim to lose their balance, and they both fell down the stairs to the orlop deck. Akbar came away mostly unscathed, but the net holding the mermaids fell onto Wassim and broke his neck. Eventually, the crew managed to seal the mermaids away in the lazarette. The carpenters came and helped Akbar carry Wassim's body away, while the others carried the chest down to the cargo deck. The captain's steward, Philippe Dahl, became very concerned about the presence of the mermaids on board the Obra Dinn, believing them to be cursed beasts that would bring them nothing but misfortune. As such, he attempted to break into the lazarette and dispose of the mermaids as quickly as possible. He was so intent on getting rid of them that he was willing to attack Seaman John Naples with a sword, who was guarding the lazarette at the time. Dahl's attack left Naples with his right leg hacked off and writhing in pain on the floor, leading the rest of the crew to rush to the scene to see what had happened. While the gunner's mate, Olus Wyatter, tried to dissuade the onlookers, Captain Witterell demanded Dahl tell him what drove him to do such a thing. He told him that the mermaids were cursed and that they should be sent back to the sea before they doom everyone on board. As punishment, the captain ordered him to be locked in the lazarette with them. Meanwhile, Evans and Wallace, along with the ship's steward, Zungi Sathi, attempted to treat Naples and made efforts to find his leg, but Naples eventually died from the pain and blood loss of his wound. As the bosun's mate, Charles Minair, dragged Dahl off to the lazarette, he warned them for not listening to his pleas. Little did they know, his predictions would soon end up being proven correct. It was decided that the Obra Dinn would abandon its journey to the Cape of Good Hope and began heading back to Britain. Leonid Volkov led his fellow topmen to hoist the sails, while Charles Minair led the seamen to steer the ship back on its course. All of a sudden, as they began their journey back, a violent storm began to form around the Obra Dinn, and Huang Li was struck by lightning, his body falling off the rigging to the deck below. Meanwhile, down on the deck, The seamen watched in horror as two enormous spider crabs ridden by black spectre-like figures climbed onto the deck. One of the crabs skewers top man Nicholas Botterill, while the seamen on the deck fled down into the ship to warn the others. The first crab climbed its way down to the gun deck, and Lars Linder warned the rest of the crew about the oncoming threat, attracting the attention of John Davis. He alerted the others that an enemy had climbed aboard the ship. He prepared to fight the oncoming threat. Carpenter Winston Smith met with seaman Nathan Peters, who told him to stay back. The two of them were then joined by Smith's mate, Marcus Gibbs. When he saw the giant crab before him, Gibbs thought he would be able to take the monster head on and, after unsuccessfully convincing his boss to join him, charged ahead and threw his axe at the beast. It proved ineffective. The crab swatted the axe away with its claw, while the spectre on its back shot spikes out towards the crew. 2 shots killed Gibbs, pinning his body to the wall, while another pierced Smith's left shoulder. The crab shot another spike at Smith, but Peters dragged him behind a wall just in time. The first crab climbed down the stairs to the orlop deck, while Davis waited to try and fend off the second crab, joined by top man Omid Gould. On the orlop deck, the rest of the crew got ready to fight the crab as it climbed down. Christian Wolfe went to the gunner's store to arm the men as quickly as possible, passing Alfred Clesteele a hand mortar in the process, and Wolfe's mate Olus Wyatt opened the gate to the cargo deck to collect more weapons. The midshipmen attempted to fend it off as best as they could. Charles Herstick threw a lantern at it to try to burn it to death, while Peter Milroy and Thomas Lanker tried to fight it with swords. Milroy's attack was blocked by its claws, while Lanker was knocked off balance and fell into the cattle pen. It then began attacking James Wallace and topman Jig Zhang, decapitating them both in its pincers. It also shot a number of spikes, one of which hit Zungi Sathi, who began to crawl away to hide. By now, the first crab had made its way to the other side of the orlop deck and had attacked the crew again, firing a number of spikes at Emil O'Farrell and pinning him to the wall. While First Mate William Hoscott and Charles Minair waited for the other crab to arrive, Peters and Smith had moved to the other stairs on the orlop deck in an attempt to cut it off. Peter Milroy and Charles Herstick were fighting off as best as they could, but Herstick decided that more drastic measures were required. He leapt onto the crab and set it and the spectre alight with his lantern. The first crab had finally been killed, but Herstick unfortunately burned to death along with it. With the first threat dealt with, the remaining crew took some time to prepare for the next crab rider. Milroy didn't hesitate to put out the fire that killed his friend. Peters opened up the door to the cargo hold to set up a trap, and Smith took the hand mortar from the bosun to help in the ambush of the crab. Meanwhile, Sathi had removed the spike from his stomach and hid in the port walkway to rest. Henry Evans then attempted to get O'Farrell down from the wall, but it was futile, and O'Farrell died from his wounds. Zungi Sathi had made his way into the walkway after being stabbed, and rested there in an attempt to stop the bleeding from his wound. On the other side of the wall, Captain Witterell deduced that the crab's goal was to reach the lazarette. The remaining men gathered to stop it progressing any further, Hoscott shouting for someone to just shoot it. Charles Minair shot at it with his rifle, but the shot missed, pierced the walkway wall, and killed Sathi on the other side. The remaining crab eventually made it to the stairs down to the cargo deck. The crew were waiting for it, however, and attacked it as soon as it got onto the stairs. Peters was waiting under the stairs for it and stabbed at it with his spear. Seaman Alexander Booth attempted to stab it with his sword, but the crab grabbed it and pulled it away. Booth was spared, however, when Smith tried to blast it with a bosun's hand mortar. The crab spotted him and skewered him through the chest. Smith wasn't done yet though, and with his last breath, fired the hand mortar straight at the crab, killing it once and for all. The monsters had been killed, but another threat would soon be upon them. Duncan Mackay, the ship's purser, had had enough of being attacked by monsters, having spent the entire crab attack hiding in his office. As a result, he decided to make an escape before anything else happened. He managed to convince Nathan Peters, Lars Linder, and Alexander Booth to come with him, and the 4 of them sneaked out onto the deck in the middle of the night to escape in the lifeboats. As they were about to leave, Peters confronted Linder and stopped him from boarding the boat. He told Linda that he hadn't forgiven him for causing his brother's death at the start of the voyage and now wanted revenge. Despite protests from both Linda and Booth that it was an accident, Peters killed Linda by clubbing him over the head and escaped with the others in the lifeboat. Linda's body was left on the deck and was later found by John Davis and his steward, Davy James. The next attack started rather unexpectedly. While Edward Spratt was relieving himself on the bow of the ship, an enormous tentacle wrapped itself around him, crushing him to death. The only person to notice was Hoskett's steward, Paul Moss, who could only look in shock and confusion as he heard the strange noises coming from the bow. The crew were now under attack by a giant kraken. Christian Wolfe called the remaining crew to arms to fend off the next threat. They gathered on the gun deck to ready the cannons to blast the kraken. Seaman George Shirley and Abraham Akbar were readying their cannons when suddenly a huge tentacle appeared through the porthole and wrapped itself around Akbar and his cannon, crushing him to death. To Wolfe's horror, he noticed that Akbar's cannon was lit and tried to free it from the tentacle, but the tentacle wrapped around him as well with the cannon pointed directly at him. Shirley then joined to try free Wolfe, but it would be his downfall. The cannon went off and fired directly at Wolfe and Shirley. Wolfe was utterly destroyed by the cannonball, left with broken limbs and his head completely detached from his body, while Shirley was launched out the window, where he subsequently drowned. The cannon also flew backwards through the wall, knocking off the aim of Seaman Henry Brennan and topman Lewis Walker. The crew decided to attack the Kraken from the main deck instead. As Leonid Volkov removed the corpses from the scene, Martin Perrott spoke to his steward Roderick Anderson about what was happening. Before he could say much else, Anderson noticed that one of the cannons was loose, and when the Kraken rocked the boat, the cannon rolled back and crushed Anderson against the wall. Without his boss to help, Olaus Wyatt took to arming the men by himself. Peter Milroy and Thomas Lanker went up onto the deck, bringing a barrel of gunpowder with them in an attempt to blast the Kraken with it. The plan was for Lanker to tie a rope round Milroy's waist, while Milroy would light the gunpowder and throw it at the Kraken when it appeared from the water. Milroy stood on the edge of the ship, but the storm caused the ship to rock to one side, and the crew lost their balance. Omid Gould couldn't hold onto the ropes and fell overboard, while Milroy too fell off the ship. He threw the barrel as hard as he could at the Kraken, while Lanker tried as hard as he could to pull him back, but the barrel blew back in the storm and exploded, killing Milroy in the process. Wyatt armed the men as quickly as he could, and the remaining crew moved to attack the Kraken. Topman Mabel was grabbed by a tentacle and was torn in half by the beast before the others could save him. Meanwhile, out on the water, the three who escaped in the lifeboat were in for a nasty surprise. The Kraken appeared directly from under them, launching the boat high into the air and sending its occupants falling into the water, where they eventually drowned. The captain's wife, Abigail, was very troubled by the attack and went to find her husband for comfort. She couldn't find him in the ship and went out onto the deck to ask Perrott for his whereabouts, even in the middle of the fight against the Kraken. As she walked out into the storm, Finlay Dalton was pulled off the deck by the Kraken, and topman Way Lee was also pulled off the boat as he was climbing the rigging. Perrott was astonished to see Abigail out in the open and ordered her to go back inside. Abigail was determined to know where her husband was, however, and so Perrott told her that he had gone below deck for an unknown reason. As they were talking, the Kraken caused the rigging to collapse, and the length of the mast came down and struck Abigail over the head. At the same time, Alfred Clesteele and his mate were fending off the Kraken's onslaught. During the fight, the Kraken wrapped a tentacle around the bosun's left arm, and Charles Minair stabbed the tentacle to save his boss. The tentacle pulled away, but not without ripping off the bosun's arm in the process. Clesteele passed out from his wounds, and the Kraken then went after Minair, tearing him apart for his troubles. By now, the crew were almost completely decimated, but someone had an idea of how to get rid of the beast. Some time after being locked in the lazarette, Philip Dahl became interested in the Formosan chest. He broke out of his chains and looked in the compartment on the top of the chest, noticing the glowing shell in the mysterious liquid. Dahl reached in to grab the shell, but the liquid slowly began burning him to death, just as it had done to Itbeng Seer. Despite the extreme pain, he managed to lift the shell out of the chest, but his strength left him, and he simply lay there as he slowly burned to death. When the Kraken attacked, Captain Witterell worked out that the mermaids were somehow responsible for both it and the crabs that had attacked earlier. He went down to the lazarette and tried to order the mermaids to call off the Kraken. When they refused, the captain decided that more drastic measures were required. He took out a pistol that he brought and shot one of the mermaids dead, threatening to do the same to the others if they didn't comply. The mermaids did not yield, and the captain ended up skewering another one with a spear, determined to kill these monsters until his crew and ship were safe. Witnessing the death of another mermaid finally made the last one yield, and the Kraken was called off. The captain took the shells from the dead mermaids and threw them into the sea. After the Kraken disappeared, Martin Perrott, along with the remaining stewards, Paul Moss and Davy James, headed down to the lazarette with the intention of setting the mermaid free by throwing it overboard. They also noticed the shell that Dahl found in the Formosan chest, realising that the captain missed one when he threw them overboard. They lifted the cage to the lazarette, and the mermaid, believing that they were here to kill it, shot a number of spikes at Perrott. To show that they meant it no harm, Perrott told the stewards to give it the shell, and eventually the mermaid calmed down. As he lay mortally wounded, Perrott made a deal with the mermaid. In return for setting it free, he wanted the mermaid to take the Obra Dinn home. Moss and James carried the mermaid to the deck and locked the door to the lazarette on Perrott's orders, while Perrott eventually passed on from his wounds. With the Kraken gone, the captain began to make preparations to get his crew to safety, and Henry Evans went down to the lazarette to see what had happened. When he found that the door was locked, Moss informed him that the key was gone. With no alternative to knowing what was inside the lazarette, Evans pushed his pet monkey in through the window and shot it dead, retrieving its corpse with a rope so that he would be able to later find out what was inside. As Alfred Clesteele lay on his deathbed, John Davis and Olaus Wyatt informed him that the Kraken had disappeared. He asked them for his mate, but they informed him that he had been torn apart by the Kraken. Clesteele inquired with them as to how they could have possibly killed the beast, but Davis informed him that the captain scared it off. With his last breath, the bosun ominously told them that a curse like that would not lift for nothing. Meanwhile, on the main deck, Captain Witterell made preparations to get some people off the boat to safety. With only one lifeboat left, he decided to prioritise getting the remaining passengers and stewards away, consisting of Henry Evans, Paul Moss, Davy James, and 2 female passengers, Emily Jackson and Jane Bird. As they began to leave, Leonid Volkov flew into a rage, determined not to be left to die on the ship. The captain ordered him to let them go, while William Huskett followed, but Volkov would not let them take his only chance to escape and stabbed Moss to death with a sword as he was about to join the others in the lifeboat. Hearing the commotion, Henry Brennan and Lewis Walker joined the captain to see what was happening. Captain Witterell demanded that Volkov let the passengers go, but Volkov was determined to make his escape while he still had the chance. He leapt off the deck towards the lifeboat, but before he could reach it, Emily Jackson picked up a musket from the boat and shot Volkov dead. Thus, the 4 remaining passengers made their escape and found their way to Morocco, where they spent the rest of their days. Back on the gun deck, Wyatt and Davis began to think about their next move. From the bosun's last words, Wyatt decided that the captain couldn't be trusted anymore, and that the rest of the crew should mutiny, sail east, and sell the shells to at least make something from their journey. They didn't notice Thomas Lanker overhearing their conversation, however, and as soon as he heard them, Lanker ran towards the stairs to alert the others of a mutiny. Wyatt ran after him and stabbed Lanker in the back multiple times. He was about to finish Lanka off with his pistol, but Davis intervened and attempted to wrestle the gun away from him. As Lanka dragged himself to the midshipman's cabin, Davis and Wyatt continued to fight over the pistol, and in the confusion, it went off and shot Wyatt in the face. Hearing the sound of a gunshot, Hoskett and Brennan made their way down to the gun deck, while Walker tossed the bodies of Moss and Volkov overboard. Hoskett spotted Lanka dragging himself into the midshipman's cabin and followed after him. The sight of Wyatt lying dead on the floor and Davis with a gun in his hands led Brennan to suspect that Davis murdered him. He didn't bother to question Davis over what had happened and bludgeoned him to death over the head, killing him in a single blow. Hoskett went to see Lanka as he was bleeding out from his stab wounds. Lanka pleaded for the first mate not to leave him and, knowing that he didn't have long left, told him to tell Peter Milroy's mother that he did his best to save him in the fight against the Kraken. Hoskett told him that he was going to save him and shouted for Brennan to get the surgeon's kit, but it was too late and Lanka eventually bled to death. The tale was then about to reach its tragic conclusion. With only 4 people left on board the Obra Dinn, William Hoskett made one last attempt to receive something for all of his hardships. Along with Henry Brennan and Lewis Walker, he planned to take the shells from the captain and sail the ship away in the hope of selling them. Setting their plan in motion, he and Brennan knocked on the door to the captain's quarters, while Walker went to the stern of the ship and climbed down from above. Hoskett demanded the captain give them the shells with a threat of death if he didn't comply, but Captain Witcherell simply opened the door and shot Hoskett with his pistol. Brennan charged into the captain's quarters and asked him what he did with the shells. The captain's response was a simple one: they were at the bottom of the sea. Brennan didn't believe him and stabbed him with a spear, but Captain Witcherell was able to endure the pain and slit Brennan's throat. While Brennan bled out on the floor, Walker had climbed down onto the deck and then came after the captain from behind. He managed to catch him by surprise and stab him in the stomach, but the captain would still not yield and, using Brennan's spear, he clubbed Walker over the head. Now completely alone, Captain Witcherell sat next to the body of his deceased wife. After having just killed his remaining crew, including his brother-in-law Hoskett, he was now at the deepest pits of despair. Thinking about all the people who had died and all the mistakes he had made on this ill-fated voyage, he apologised to his wife for everything, telling her he would see her soon before picking up his pistol and ending his life. The Mermaid kept its promise to return the Obra Dinn to Britain, and when it arrived, the East India Company's chief inspector received a package from Henry Evans. It told the inspector that Evans was planning to catalogue the fate of the Obra Dinn using his magic watch called the Memento Mortem, but due to his failing health, he posted it to the inspector to record the journey and send it back to Evans in Morocco. The inspector filled in all the fates of everyone on the ship, but was unable to access the lazarette, sending the book back to Evans unfinished. The inspector left after completing their work, and the Obra Dinn then sank into the ocean. 1 year later, the inspector received a package from Jane Bird. She told them that Evans was thankful to the inspector for filling in the book, but that he had passed away from his illness before he could complete it. The package contained the mummified paw of Evans's pet monkey, which the inspector used to see the memories of the lazarette, and thus finally completing the story.